Good afternoon. My name's Faulkner from EnviroCopper. Welcome to this presentation, and we'll get started. In today's presentation, we'll do a bit of an introduction. We'll have a quick chat about COVID-19, as that's obviously affected everyone. We'll have a look at some ISR economics and opportunities, a little bit of a quick update on the Kapunda project, and then we'll have a look at the challenges and solutions that we've found in our project going forward. So the ALTA symposiums go from strength to strength, as evidenced by the current program, and I'd like to thank Alan for the opportunity to speak today and congratulate him on 25 years of ALTA conferences. It's interesting to see how the industry is evolving at the moment. It's going ahead at a great rate of knots. It's moving quickly from theoretical to practical, although there's still a lot of research happening in the ISR space. A lot of that involves geophysical monitoring of groundwater, excipient systems, electrokinetics, barrier technology, etc. And all of this sort of stuff, these advances in technologies, have opened up a wider range of suitable geological environments. ISR for other metals continues to move towards being an accepted method of mining. If we have a look at what's happening in the States, Copper Fox recently provided an update on the potential project economics of their Van Dyke project. Florence received their draft aquifer permit. Excelsior's Gunnison operation went into production in December 2019, then had to halt due to COVID-19. And that's probably a good segue into the next slide, which is about COVID. That's affected everyone and everything, including the mining industry. It's affected both the supply and demand side. That's a table showing some of the drops in guidances for some of the larger copper producers throughout the world. And it's also had a pretty severe effect on the demand side, down as much as 5% during 2020. But general consensus seems to be that a combination of fiscal stimulus packages, clean energy and digitalisation programs will boost demand and lift prices above previous levels. So there's just a few quotes lifted from the web there about the likely impact of the fiscal stimulus packages and the fact that it's still viewed as a very significant part of the green energy transformation. So looking at ISR opportunities, ISR offers the opportunity to profitably recover previously uneconomic low-grade resources or resources constrained by conventional extraction. They have large potential for value realisation if successful, relatively low capital cost to get into production, and can respond quite flexibly to either increases or decreases in commodity market volatility. If we have a look at the background to ISR economics, obviously this is looking at a conventional mine. Well, ISR doesn't have those massive mining costs, doesn't involve any crushing of ore, doesn't have any milling. So it takes out a fairly significant portion of those costs that are associated with conventional mining. People often, one of the things we hear is that people worry about how can you make money when you only recover 50 to 70% of the ore. If we have a look at this little graph, what you can see is that even though you only access 60 to 70% of the ore, because your total costs to recover that metal are so low compared to conventional mining, you can still make similar profits. So that's the sort of argument we have for why we should be able to make some serious money, given that we only recover a certain amount of the ore. So moving on, just to have a quick look at what's happening in the States as far as economics go. These are just some of the values published in NI 43-101 statements for Gunnison, Van Dyke and Florence. I guess the takeaway messages are pretty healthy IRRs and pretty low all-in costs, you know, $1.23, $1.44 and $1.11. That sort of averages out to around about $3,000 a tonne. Copper price today was about 6,700 US, so pretty healthy margins for ISR economics. So in overview, I guess it's low impact, it's scalable in that you can ramp up or slow down production depending on how the markets are going. Very low operating cost compared to a conventional mine, and very healthy margins. So it's as far as I'm concerned, copper is a good commodity to be in, and I think that ISR is a good way to recover that product. The other thing to mention is that many potential copper ISR opportunities have already been identified. There are lots and lots of deposits out there that have been explored, drilled, and are currently uneconomic. And if we just have a look at the Australian example, this is a map from Geoscience Australia. They have gone through their database of deposits and identified a fairly significant amount of what they call paramarginal ore. This is ore that's been identified but probably isn't economic under the current mining practices. They've estimated somewhere north of 1 million tonnes of copper and greater than 150 tonnes of gold. So that sort of equates to somewhere around about $20 billion worth of metal sitting in the ground, which is a fairly substantial amount of money, and some of that's very likely to be amenable to ISR. A little closer to home, if we have a look at South Australian opportunities, there's a map produced by the state government that shows copper occurrences in South Australia with mines as well. And there's greater than 900 of those occurrences recorded in the state database. If we have a look at some of the rock types that are likely to be amenable for ISR, there's greater than 100 of those deposits occurring in those types of rocks, and a lot of those contain oxide copper species, so they should be amenable for ISR. So these aren't going to be giant-sized projects, but some of them would certainly make some reasonable margin. So there's significant opportunities for copper and gold in South Australia, and our Kapunda project was one of these that we picked up. So we'll just quickly have a review of the Kapunda project. So the Kapunda project sits about 80 kilometres north of Adelaide. So it's a old historic mining town up there. It was in fact Australia's first economic metal mine, and is currently used as a tourism site out there. It's got a fractured rock system out there, 3 main sets of fractures running around the place, 2 steeply dipping, 1 sub-horizontal. The copper species out there are oxide and secondary copper sulfide, so they're all amenable for leaching. And one thing that made it interesting was the wealth of historic drill information available. During the 1960s and 70s, Utah and a few other companies put many holes into Kapunda, and a lot of that data is, a lot of the core and the chips are stored at the Tonsley Core Library, so it's a good project to kick off on. So we approached the federal government, and they made a considerable investment of $2.85 million in ECR through a Commonwealth Government CRC-P research grant to look at the possibility of doing in-situ recovery on Kapunda and similar deposits. So the knowledge gaps we had to address, the effectiveness of ISR to recover value metals, copper and gold in different geological environments. We're using a targeted suite of lixiviants, so not the normal sulfuric acid or stuff that's been around the place, but lixiviants that are a little bit more suitable for putting into natural groundwater systems. We wanted to look at accurate simulation of fluid flow coupled with a reactive transport model, basically to try and get a better method of calculating recoverable resources for in-situ recovery. We want to try and find a way to monitor fluid flows and lixiviant extraction in real time. It's always been one of the veins of in-situ recoveries that you can't see what's happening in real time. You put your bores in, the fluid moves around. If it goes where it's supposed to, it works. If it doesn't, you're in strife. So trying to use some advanced geophysical methods to monitor that fluid is going to be a big part of the project. Communicating environmental values to stakeholders quickly and easily is key to getting social acceptance. Kapunda sits 500 metres from the main street, so community acceptance of ISR as a mining method is paramount for going forward. And we also need to design an ISR template. We don't just want to do a one-off, we want to have a template that other companies can follow from both from a technical sense and from a regulatory framework. And we'll discuss that a bit later on in the presentation. So just a quick whiz through some research outcomes to date. We've identified 2 potentially suitable excipient systems that will work with the naturally acidic groundwater out at Kapunda, MSA and thiosulfate. They're both readily biodegradable, aren't persistent biological or toxic chemicals. So they tick the environmental banner and, as you can see from the charts, dissolve the copper species out there pretty well. We've had a state-of-the-art probabilistic groundwater model developed. That's to help us do particle tracking and help us design the monitor network. Part of the regulatory approval process will be to have a fairly substantial monitoring networking to ensure that fluids go where they're supposed to and not get into nearby receptors. We've started some computer simulations of the hydrothermal flow reactive transport model being developed by the University of Adelaide. This will be one of the primary tools we use to determine well placement and how we actually go about mining the Kapunda ore body, and hopefully we can take that tool to other deposits around the place. Our environmental scorecard system's being drafted up. CSIRO Land and Water went through the receptors around the place and have highlighted some particular elements of the environment that need monitoring. So that is now being developed into a scorecard approach that we hope to develop into an app and have online so that people can monitor the environmental performance of the project in real time. And we've conducted some focus groups in conjunction with Tom Measham, who will be doing a presentation for ALTA as well, looking at how the community feels about a renewed mining industry at Kapunda, and in particular, how they feel about in-situ recovery. Generally, the results were that there's a positive feel from the stakeholders, and that obviously protection of the environment and how it's going to be regulated are sort of key factors that they want more information on. Our field research to date, we've put in 2 bores. We have done optical scanning down those bores to accurately model the fractures out there. This is to help us predict where our fluids are going to go and look at our model our copper recovery. We've done a tracer test, pump test and tracer test using sodium bromide. We shifted it pumped from one bore to another, and you can see we get breakthrough in about 200 minutes, which is reasonably quick for given the rock types that we're pumping fluid through out there. And we inadvertently produced our first copper. The steel-coated submersible pump that we were using to do the pump and tracer test at the end of the 5 or so hours came out coated in copper. So we're already on the way. So I guess time to move on to the various challenges we're facing at the moment. At last year's ALTA ISR session, Dr. Horst Martin referred to ISR 4 and gave an excellent summary of the technical challenges facing future ISR operations. I'd like to discuss some of the non-technical challenges that the Kapunda project is facing. These are, I guess, a sign of the maturity of the project, that we're moving from, the technical side of stuff to actually doing things on the ground, which requires various approvals from government bodies. So we're at the stage where we want to circulate fluids, doing the first round of in-ground testing, which will allow us to measure recovery rates and calibrate some of the laboratory models. So that throws up a number of distinct challenges. First one is, of course, navigating a regulatory framework in assessing the suitability of a deposit for us as a junior miner. Second one, we've got to deal with overlapping land access jurisdictions, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. And 3, of course, is conveying information in a suitable form to attract capital from investors. Obviously a critical part of any business. We've got some grant funding at the moment, but that will run out soon enough, and we will have to attract funding to take the project to the next level. So looking at the regulatory framework, I guess a key challenge in progressing non-traditional ISR projects and make them remain attractive for junior companies is that the first stage of work can't be too expensive or too prohibitive. There needs to be a framework that allows the first stage of in-ground work, which is the primary go, no-go phase, to be done in a relatively timely and cost-effective manner. South Australia has a long-standing regulatory framework to deal with uranium ISR mines, Beverley and Honeymoon, of course, but it's not a perfect fit for non-uranium ISR projects due to its significant focus on risk associated with radionuclides. Obviously, copper and gold don't have those risks associated with them, so there needs to be a framework to work around that. And we've taken the approach that the first stage of in-ground work's roughly equivalent to conventional mining when they take a bulk sample for metallurgical studies. It's the similar type of work. So, looking at a solution in response, ECRs work closely with the state government to find a regulatory pathway which is fit for purpose. The outcome of this work has been the generation of the specific requirements for the conduct of non-uranium ISR on-ground test work on exploration licences in South Australia. And that's a critical part, exploration licences rather than moving to other tenure statuses in South Australia like RLs or MLs. In parallel to ongoing laboratory investigations and engagement with our key stakeholders, ECR is now finalising an application against these requirements to advance their first in-ground trials, the site environment and excipient test. And it's been good to see the state government has been quite proactive at looking at ways of supporting innovative methods of recovering these stranded assets. So we're grateful to them for that. So we're on the first step to a template for copper and gold ISR. So just quickly having a look at the regulatory framework. So the traditional approach would have been that the green is the RLs versus the beige, which is exploration licenses. So originally we would have had to apply for an RL. At this stage, it looks like we might be able to conduct the first phase of work on an exploration license, which for us is going to be a little bit simpler and involve a little less on the regulations or regulatory front. Next challenge, overlapping land access jurisdictions. So Kapunda, being an old historic mine site, like a lot of old historic mine sites, will be affected by a number of legislations. There's obviously the local regional council, the Light Regional Council, who are the owners of the area. They were gifted it in the early 1970s. It was listed on the State Heritage Register in 1987, so there are various categories of heritage over the site. There's an EL over the place, and we of course have an area that our joint venture takes into account, the blue box around there. So it also requires classification under the Work Health and Safety Act, as the Work Health and Safety Act covers tourist mines, and you have parts of tourism mines that are for tourism and parts of tourism mines that are not for tourism. So it's quite a complicated piece of legislation. So our solution was to negotiate an amended community land management plan that splits an area into sort of tourism focused and non-tourism focused to qualify with the Local Government Act requirements. And we have managed to discuss excising an area from the non-tourism area that ECR will become the mine owner, mine operator to satisfy the Work Health and Safety Act requirements. So it's been a complex process and has required some time in negotiations with the Light Council, but we're grateful that they've been able to put in the time and we've come to a solution that's going to work well for both parties. So looking at the investor challenge, this is probably something quite near and dear to everyone's heart. Investors are always sceptical of something new. Learning and teething problems are always part of a new process. The mining industry itself is notoriously conservative. So you sort of start off a little bit on the back foot when you're going to them with a project like In-Situ recovery. Aspects of every geological host environment will always be different, and that makes people a little bit nervous because you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. There's always going to be some differences with every single project. That can make resource estimation on ISR complex, and again, that is something that investors look carefully at. There needs to be a regulatory process. The investors need to have comfort in the fact that the project can proceed from a regulatory sense, and that needs to be managed, and that's part of what we're working towards. And of course, the emerging green investors and the awarding of copper mark by ICA for responsible ethical copper production is becoming more and more important, particularly with a lot of larger funds. They are looking for ethical and responsible production, so ISR might tick that box. So solutions, rather than being new, we've educated them that we're advancing existing knowledge and that ISR is seen as sustainable, ethical and a green form of mining, particularly when you're producing copper, which is touted as very much as a green metal. Our initial seed capital came from an entrepreneurial investor. Thor Mining chairman Mick Billing had previous experience with ISR and realised that it would probably make a pretty cheap way to produce some copper. Gaining the Commonwealth Government grant money was key to de-risking the project, partly for investors but mostly for stakeholders. It also raised the profile of the project with the regulators. The state government gained quite a degree of confidence in us when they realised that the federal government was kicking in quite a bit of money into the project. So our research outcomes will better define ISR resource estimation and modelling. We hope that will give investors much more confidence in the recoverable reserve when we get to the stage of estimating it. So have we been successful in raising 3 to 5 million for our next step? Well, watch this space. We're on the hunt. So in summary, as ISR moves to becoming a more common form of sustainable mining, the challenges move from being predominantly technical to non-technical. So these challenges include government regulatory frameworks, various land use jurisdictions, ESG factors, and demonstrating the opportunities to investors. Fortunately, ISR has a pretty compelling economic argument, and with its relatively low footprint, it's well placed to answer these challenges going forward. I think we will see in-situ recovery become a major part of the mining space, certainly in the next decade, possibly within the next 5 years. We currently have another project on the cards and are looking at another 2 or 3, and are well aware of other companies that are looking at the same thing. And it's been a very interesting process to watch how the ALTA ISR days have changed over the last 3 years, going from the theoretical to the practical, and I hope you enjoy seeing some of the other presentations at ALTA that look at these types of challenges. So I'd like to thank you for listening and hope that you've enjoyed it and that you will have a look at some of the other ISR presentations for ALTA.